Hey, so we're gonna have a conversation between Daniel and myself, so Luis. Both of us have been around shows, or well, he's been in bands, I've been around shows and things like that for probably 10 years, maybe a little less, a little more. And we just want to share what some of the things that we have seen, some of the experiences, and have a conversation about it. That's what this is going to be about. So one of the things that we want to talk about is straight edge. That's like the origins of straight edge is here in DC, and how how that way of viewing things it spread from here to all over the place. There's still some straight edge around this area too, and things like that, and it's the way that straight edge takes care of themselves, like in terms of health, in terms of goals, and they have that mentality, and a lot of that stuff has also has to do with the DIY culture, and so we want to talk about a little bit of that and why or some of the things that we think that it hasn't spread to the Latino community around here in the DMV, which is pretty big. It's a pretty big community, and it's usually been over the years, I guess how many years the punk scene around this area since like late 70s, right? Late 70s. So that's about what, 50 years?
Yes.
Right. So 50 years, and then probably like some of the immigration from Latinos has started in the 80s, late 80s, right? The biggest ones, right? And slowly started progressing where now we have majority Latino populations in the counties around this area, like PG County, Montgomery County. So we just wanted to try to talk about a little bit about why we think some of the stuff that hasn't spread as much as it should have by now to the Latino communities. So what are some things you want to say about that?
Yeah, so I just recently began therapy for substance abuse because being a part of the punk scene in America, there's a lot of drugs surrounding it. And even though I come from DC, which is the place where straight edge rock was invented, this is not the case in all the places that are involved in punk. There is a lot of temptations when you're playing in a punk band to consume drugs and alcohol, and not just punk, but any sort of music. And I believe that as a person of color, we should take the teachings that the white straight edge people begun in the 80s in DC and implement them in our communities, because it's our communities that struggle the most with drug abuse due to the conditions that we live in and exist in. We have more reasons to be stressed than a white person from the suburbs. If they're doing it for their communities, they're encouraging each other to be sober and straight edge, we should also do the same.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. There's I remember when I that's one of the first things that attracted me to punk. That it was that story. The Minor Threat. And I was like, wow. Because there was always alcohol and drugs around our family when I grew up. We always had that uncle and stuff that it was always drunk and violence and all those things that happen. So in the back of my head, I was like, there's got to be something else, right? It cannot just be. We cannot just have fun just with alcohol all the time. And that is not. And then I found it, and I found it, and I found it, and then I used to like it a lot and all that. But then I did with time. I did realize that it was mostly white, right? And I always ask myself, how come the immigrants or Latinos that could use this type of mentality or way of thinking don't do it, right? And it's and it's a lot of things. No, it's what I began to find out is just there's a lot of things. Is that for Latinos, it's also a way to cope. You know, it's also a way to cope for all the shitty stuff that happens in our lives. You know, a lot of times we don't have time to reflect on life. You know, so and then usually white people, middle class, they have all the time in the world to reflect and see and look at different point of views, the different ways of behaving, different ways of eating, all these things. So yeah, that's so yeah. So I was kind of disillusioned, and in the end, I was kind of debating whether I could, because I was straight edge for a while because of that, right? I was like, oh man, I'm gonna do that. But then I was like, is this actually real? I mean, is this like is this doable? You know what I mean? Is this doable, real? And then I started looking at also in the way of maybe there's a way to still be like the other Latinos, but be able to control it a little more. You know what I mean? Be able to control that a little more, not overdo it, and still chill and have fun with other Latinos. Most of them still drink and all those things. At the same time, still talk about it. And all those things. It's good to have those examples and things like that. But yeah, I agree. I agree with what you're saying.
Right. It's basically like this thing that inspired us to get into punk music, because I also remember the first hardcore band that I ever really got into was Minor Threat and the Bad Brains, and I was attracted to Minor Threat because of their straight edge ideas and all that. Later on, I did stray away from the message of Minor Threat, and I actually developed an addiction, but going back to what Jose was saying, it's almost like we got into the straight edge thing, and in his case, it almost seems like the straight edge thing was almost like he was attempting to relate so much to white people who were not necessarily even trying to relate with him, even though he was trying to relate to them. They weren't trying to relate to him the way that he was trying to relate to them. And in that process, it's like you're almost alienating your own community, because our own communities, they don't have these ideas, this language of straight edge and all of that, because of the fact that we just, as he mentioned, we haven't had the comforts of living in the DC suburbs and going to private schools where we have the ability to reflect on this. So it's like the people who could most use these ideas never had the time to develop them. And it doesn't mean that they're against them. It doesn't mean that every Latino is going to be the stereotypical borracho listening to rancheras, crying about this and that, and then the heartbroken drunk man and all that. But the reason that we didn't have more people from our community expressing these ideas is because we didn't have the material conditions that would allow us to develop such a philosophy, such as the way that the white scene in DC was able to do in the 80s.
Aside from that, there was also the fact about social justice, about the fundraisers and all those things. All of that was like something that I hadn't seen, because I had kind of like experienced some other scene, some other rock scene, Latino scene, and there was all that their way of looking at things was like trying to make it, and also try to make money off of it and all those things. And obviously, that's not just the Latinos. There's other scenes, rock scenes. That's how they view things, right?
A lot of white bands do that now.
Right. But this is. But I was just looking at the story of the DIY mentality also, right? Not just straight edge, it's just DIY. That's even more to it, right?
Yep.
So that part of it also attracted me a lot. Oh, do it yourself. You can actually record your own things. You could just pick up an instrument, all of that stuff. And that even Latino musicians in the area that were doing bands and things like that, just rock bands, there's no that wasn't even going through their heads, right? So I'm not saying one is. I mean, to me, it just attracted more. I'm more attracted to that to the other one, right? It's just I don't know. I don't know if it's idealism that's how I view things or whatever. But yeah, that's what I'm saying. So there was that too. There was that other attraction too, right? And so, but that has to do a little more with all the things that happen in. I mean, because you have all the cities, all the places where there are Latinos into DIY and there are Latinos into straight edge or things like that, right?
And again, this is specifically, we're trying to talk about the DMV because obviously this doesn't apply to places like California or let's say even like Texas or etc.
Even in Latin America too, there are those things already, but that has to do with just the knowledge being spread through generations, right? Which hasn't happened here, right? Within the white scene and within the white population, obviously it hasn't spread, but in the Latino communities, there hasn't those beliefs or those ways of looking at things that hasn't spread. And I was like kind of thinking, why is that? Why did that doesn't happen? And it's because a lot of the scenes that I come into, coming to go see the bands and all that, those DIY scenes, straight edge scenes, are mostly white, right? Are mostly white, right? Even though there's a huge Latino population around it, right? Like PG County, Montgomery County schools are Montgomery County schools are majority Latinos, right? Majority Latinos in Montgomery County. DC has a lot of Latinos. So that's what I always like. How come there's no more Latinos involved in these things? And I don't know. Over the years, I just kept coming with ways of looking at the answers for that, coming up with some answers for that. And it's not that because of all this ways of viewing things and all this knowledge or things that those scenes have, straight edge, DIYs, punks, and all that. It's not that they don't have the knowledge to know that there are Latinos around and they don't know they're not playing punk. It's just that there's nothing being done. There's nothing being done because I don't know. I don't know if it's like necessarily that they don't care. Like specifically saying, "Hey, I don't care." I don't know if you ask them, they would be like, "Oh, I don't really care." But I think it has to do with just an excuse also, right? Like they're saying, "Oh, but they haven't actually asked us for help specifically, so therefore we don't want to go out of we don't want to impose." That's usually I have heard that comment, those type of comments before. We don't want to impose, and then I get that from for a little bit, right? But then it starts looking like an excuse because it's years and years and years and years. We're talking about 20, 30 years. So, right? Yeah.
And interestingly enough, with the straight edge culture and scene, which by the way, we are not attacking in any sort of way. We actually praise it, and what we're trying to say is we kind of envy white people who were able to come up with that for their communities, while they probably need it the least compared to our people, to Latino people, to Black people, to indigenous people, and even to Asian people and Middle Eastern people who do not come from Caucasian as white households. Interestingly enough, the people who started straight edge, they didn't just stop at straight edge. They were actually like people like bands like Minor Threat and Fugazi specifically, who has Ian MacKaye in it. They were attempting to first of all, he wasn't even trying to start a straight edge movement. That was just the way he lived. But he was a person who was actually involved in activism and helping other communities, marginalized communities, queer people, Latino people, immigrants, Black people, people who homeless people. I recently saw a Fugazi chart of all the things they do. And what's interesting is that a lot of straight edge people now are very depoliticized. All they care about is just being vegan and straight edge. And it's almost like, okay, you're vegan and straight edge, but what are you really doing other than just taking care of yourself? You're basically just helping yourself, who's a white person, be better individually, but you're not doing anything about community. And it's just ironic how a lot of people who now adhere to this way of life, this philosophy of being straight edge vegan, they just stop at that. When the original founders of that, they didn't just stop at that. They were straight edge vegan, but they were also helping other people. They were doing fundraisers, actively organizing to assist other communities, donating their time, donating their resources, donating the benefits from shows, and all of that. And the straight edge scenes from nowadays, they basically just became gangs of white people who are completely unactivist, depoliticized, and you might as well just be the police if that's the case, because that's basically what cops do. You just harass people who are using drugs to cope with the stresses of life. And you might be judging people of color for using substances when you don't know why it is that they're using those substances, or why it is that you know that they're awkward or that they're weird. You know what I mean? And yeah, so
I have an additional things. I mean, yeah, all the stuff that we have said, I don't. It's kind of hard to articulate without sounding that we think it's all their fault. You know, like that. We think that, and we're like victimizing ourselves. You know,
Right. We're not trying to do that.
We're not trying to do that. We're just trying to.
We are victims.
We're just trying to bring up issues, bring topics, and to reflect, to think about some of these things and why some of these things are happening. It would also be good to have discussions, right? I mean, you know, maybe some of those band members can, you know, let us know what goes through their heads, you know. I think from what I have seen, because I haven't actually talked to one of them and asked them these things specifically, but what I think, you know, it boils down to we don't want to impose our ways of being,
Right.
you know, and also they're probably worrying about looking like you know, religious people trying to spread the word, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right. So I think those things kind of stop them from doing that. Maybe some of them want to do it, right? And but I think some of those things stop it.
They don't know how to.
But then there's also the thing that I think would have been the trigger or that they might be waiting for or something, is that there are a few Latinos. There were a few Latinos in those scenes, right? There were a few Latinos in those scenes, like maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 over the years, right? So they're probably saying, if those people they're not saying anything, or they're not caring too much about it, you know, maybe it's not that important. Maybe it's not a huge deal, not a big deal. So I know you were part of that, and I'm not blaming just you or anything, none of that, because there were others.
Right.
There were others, right? There were others. And right, so, but that's also something that we need to reflect on.
That's
you know,
right.
why it didn't happen, why we don't care too much about it. So,
Yes.
you know.
that's a very accurate point, and I just want to use this as a moment to remind people to not generalize. Just because you have one person of color who's your friend who's not talking about this, that doesn't mean that other people of color don't care about these issues. Okay, one person of color doesn't speak for everyone. Just like how we don't speak for all Latinos either. Maybe some Latinos don't give a fuck about this, and that's fine. But I can go ahead and take a bet that the overwhelming majority of them, if they heard the correct ideas, they would care. And the problem is that they're not hearing the ideas in the first place. They're just surrounded by basically this, and not to make it racialized because white people go for things too, but they're surrounded by this white noise. Okay? And when you're surrounded by white noise, that affects the way you think and what you think is important. And I think we're going to end it at that for this moment. And we appreciate anyone who took the time to listen. Thank you, and goodbye.
Say goodbye.
Hey, bye.
Bye-bye.
Did he?